In the Salesforce world, I think the biggest challenge is the lack of clarity and the lack of context that most companies have. The biggest challenge is the lack of clarity and the lack of context that most companies have when making decisions as to how they're going to run their business.
The unlearning might very well be the most important skill of this time. Mid-market companies are trying to comfort themselves. Oh, we have all the time in the world because those giants are like going to take forever. No, they're not going to take forever.
Most companies today are trying to run faster than ever, adopting AI, modernizing systems, integrating new tools, but many are doing it through a business that they cannot fully explain. The mid market, especially, now has access to platforms that used to be only available to enterprise businesses. And that democratization is now becoming available for everyone. When your system grows faster than your understanding, you don't necessarily gain power, that you lose confidence. And so today's guest, Peter Milodecki, has lived across continents. He's led transformations in Europe, Asia, and the US. He's rebuilt ERP foundations, redesigned data ecosystems, and expanded business to 32 different countries. He's helped to launch and build a boutique medical device company and scale this globally. And he knows what companies are getting right and what they're doing wrong and what to focus on next. So, Peter, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Mike, for having me. Very excited to be here.
Absolutely. So maybe we can just start. You've led these digital transformations, and there's a significant shift happening in the marketplace right now. What do you believe that leaders are not necessarily seeing or they're not speaking honestly about in today's market?
I would point out to two elements. The first one is the complete shift of paradigm in terms of what is available in terms of data and computation powers. I think that intuitively, and it becomes as sort of a muscle memory for a lot of leaders, especially if they operate in mid-market or let's say non-enterprise setups, that a lot of things just cannot be done. The things are not visible, that the implementations are too heavy or too costly or too complicated, and that the information that comes with it is not available or not processable. That is no longer true. And you pointed it out very nicely when you talked about democratization, business enablers, if you will. They are definitely available, right? So we can assume that the information is omnipresent and computation power is unlimited. Now, what the question is, what you're going to do with that power. And this is where it comes to that inevitable need of redefine your business objectives with a lot of integrity and a lot of logics that I think a lot of businesses struggle to define, especially in the dynamically changing environment. A lot of theorists in this AI or algorithmic leadership time refer to the creativity of the business leaders in terms of redefining their business processes to the specific outcome that aligns strategically with their organizations, right? And what it requires is a courage to stop building processes incrementally and look at them as if they were AI native, if they were AI centric. The one example that comes to mind is the CRM process, right? How would we build the funnel generations if we don't just simply add insights or the opportunity scoring or the agentic opportunity summary, but instead we imagine that we're starting today, and the way we are going to define the success and efficiency of our funnel generation depends on how AI or Agent Force defines what's the good opportunity and what is bad opportunity, right? If I think that if you give in to that thought, you can actually feel I would call it a liberating feeling of not necessarily carrying over all the processes that you had, all the KPIs that focus on the number of activities or a type of activities that you imagine your field sales reps should do in order to successfully close the business and sell yourself well. There's other way to score that, right? There's other ways to define what's appropriate and what is the right action within the market. And I'm going to rely on that, right? I see the insights, and as a leader, I can relate to them. If I don't do that fully, I retrain my agents in a way that align better with my vision of how my customers should be serviced or how my business should be developed. but I no longer rely on this more old-fashioned flows or KPIs that were perhaps a good practice, but not necessarily dynamically aligned with how I make my opportunity successful.
I think you hit on such an important part, which is defining the process. And there's been often times when, talking with clients or even just looking at organizations that I've had a chance to work with, where I've asked them, well, what is your process? And they might walk me through a screen flow, or they might show me a Visio chart or a Lucid chart and explain that process and say, well, this is what we do. But I feel like there's a complete lack of clarity on what they think they're doing, meaning how it's been documented versus the reality of how actually it's been built. And so I'm wondering, have you come across that in any of your experiences where the gap between reality and idea of what that process flow is significant?
I always want to say it relates to every single process. And I think this is such an important point that you brought up if you apply the dynamics of the current world, and not only from technological and AI point of view, but also how much faster the markets shift. And that goes down to economic situations, the geopolitical situations, the post-COVID recovery, the way that companies adjust their organizational designs and how people work, partially because AI is there, but partially just because the business changes and the way we operate in the market changes. So I think this gap is bigger than ever. What I find very important, especially for the middle-sized organizations or smaller type organizations, is to give in, or I would say give up the need to understand every detail or every step along that organizational chart about that Visio flow chart that you described. Rather be very strong-minded about what is the outcome of that process that you want to achieve. When I was a little younger, I learned how to fly small airplanes. And the instructor who was my teacher at the time, he told me about his times of learning how to fly, which started by putting them on a pile of bricks and giving him a heavy wet rag to rotate with your hand, just so that you feel with your body how the torques work, right? And then you would build on that, learning all the analog steps or flying until you got to all the digital and fly-by-wire. And I think that at certain point where the technology and business is going, it's no longer comprehensible how the every little wire operates in your company, especially when you're talking about agentic processes where not even the creators of that technology really know how they reason and how they compute. All you can do is constantly moderate the outcome of what those processes generate, right? And how the business is progressing efficiently because of what you do. I often ask my team, and a part of the internal transformation that we are trying to create around these newly accessible tools. Imagine your work from 12 months from now, 24 months from now, and how much time will you be spending training and reorganizing your agents, right? Can you dedicate 25% of your time, 30, 50% of your time to do just that? And even if you're not a technical person, it's verifying whether the set of agents that your organization has prepared for you is actually improving your process and modifying your process in terms of it being more optimal and more productive. You take responsibility of telling your technical team, this is a good agent, this is a bad agent, these are the factors that we need to include in terms of our knowledge articles, so that my sales coach is actually more efficient toward a specific product category that I am trying to launch next year. So this completely changes the paradigm is how you look at the processes. And I believe that the risk or the fear that a lot of leaders have is, I am no longer understanding how the nitty-gritty of everyday's flow of this process works. But I think that clinging to that can actually slow them down.
Who do you think is there an individual who is ultimately responsible for making sure that documentation of process is captured? Is it something that is a bottom up? Is it a top down? We talked about AI and automation and making things faster and handing things off to these different agentic approaches. But who's ultimately responsible to make sure that there's a clear understanding across the organization of what today looks like?
Well, I do have a strong opinion that it is a down element. The process documentation of any sort of documentation is literally the last thing anybody wants to do. The beautiful thing about living in an AI age is that AI exponentially speeds up the production of the documentation, validating and amending it. So it creates a beautiful opportunity for a lot of organizations to catch up on their documentation gap. However, the culture of discipline, that's something that comes from top down. That starts with the CEO, that starts with the C-suite, that starts with the board. It is the governance expectation that you need to create as a culture and then as a routine, not something you get motivated for because something fell through the cracks or we lost market or we have an unsuccessful audit and now we are going to catch up to close that gap. It is the culture of discipline that is necessary for scalability, with the assumption that processes are going to become more and more abstract. And if not because you've introduced agentic elements, then purely for the fact that you want to grow. The more you grow, the less details you can manually handhold. And that comes to a disciplined process documentation, governance, and then how you manage the governance and documentation itself moving forward, knowing that it's most likely going to evolve every couple of months.
It's interesting you mentioned culture and governance and top-down approaches and leadership. And I feel like as companies have evolved and as technology has evolved, it feels like we've almost stepped away from our understanding of how business operates. Each team thinks that their own little microcosm or their own way of managing it and providing that operationalization part of the business is in isolation. And all they have to do is worry about making their piece more effective and more efficient. The picture I'm getting in my mind's eye is that the business is an entity, it's a body, it's a living organism, it's a complete person, so to speak. And each part of that business has to operate in connection with the whole. That if you get one part of the business that is focused on providing the functionality essentially of an arm and it's doing that thing, but it doesn't connect to the rest of the body, that part can get to be as effective and efficient as possible, but it won't ultimately help the entire business grow. Who do you feel is doing a good job, or have you seen anyone truly provide that perspective of helping organizations truly understand the business as a whole? Or is it something that is more of an internal organic understanding that comes with the business over time? Can you speak to that as your business has grown?
Yes, and I think that this is probably the central point of how the successful business leadership in the coming years is going to need to look like. As a matter of fact, this is the bullseye. A lot of reasons why I see this has not always been the problem that causes organizations to stall or go out of business is because of that inertia of doing business the old way. I mean, you could basically allow yourselves multiple degrees of inefficiencies, the silo thing that you described. And in many cases, the worst thing that happened is the slower growth in the long term. But what we are dealing right now is this incredible acceleration, right? So with the opportunity that you have by being able to cheaply and quickly deploy multiple process enablers in multiple corners of the organization, can be for the bad and can be for the good, and it can be for the bad, right? You can leverage it toward the quick success, but it can also amplify the stall, right? And it can makes the lack of coherent leadership vision or the determination to document and map your processes, to define your processes, and then what you described go even one layer higher, because now it talks how those processes and functional teams interact with one another, each of them on steroids of AI and dedicated enablers, right? That if there are any gap or a crack in the leadership vision, the leadership determination is going to be exposed so much faster and potentially with so much deeper consequences to the organization.
I'm going to go back to your plane analogy for a second, because I think there's something here that is worth exploring. We've all heard the analogy in the startup world of building the plane while you fly it, which is essentially you are just needing to put together the components as quickly as possible to make sure the plane doesn't crash and you're able to get some lift and you're able to extend yourself over a distance. Using this plane analogy, who is the person or what type of person would be the best co-pilots to be able to sit in that plane with the executive team that's making all those decisions to make sure that company does not stall, that company does not pull the wrong lever at the wrong time? Is this an internal person that can sit alongside that executive team and provide that objective opinion of I'm not going to stop you from what you're doing, but I've done it enough times to know that if you do these things in this order, the plane is going to crash. Someone from the outside providing a perspective, who's that individual? Because they need to have awareness that may not necessarily be part of that executive team. Can you speak to that?
I think that what is very important when you sail the uncharted waters is that you get all the knowledge that is available to optimize your decisions. Yeah? And coming back to the airplane analogy, this is kind of crazy idea to put yourself in a paper thin can with the engine attached to it and go fly 6,000 miles over ground, right? So what you need to do is to collect the knowledge that is available to you in the most pragmatic way and sort it out that helps you maximize the outcome with limited risk. And I think that to every leader, and this is a coaching advice that probably seasoned coaches would say, if you are sitting in the captain's chair and if you are a leader, whether you are CEO or you're in the C-suite or you run the department, you need to build that network around you that consists of your advisors, your coaches, your mentors, and your network, right? So if you think that there's your job ahead of you, you have your team, but you have your coach, you have your mentor, you have your advisor, you have your network to reach out to. And I think this is incredibly important for every region to be humble of what they know. The unlearning might very well be the most important skill of this time. And if it is so, how do you quickly catch up of the knowledge, right? If you build that sort of setup that you reach out to the sources of knowledge where you can find it, whether they are inside the organization or outside organization, it's almost like with all these tools. The point is that they are very dynamic. There's no one size fits all. You're not going to have an advisory board supports your C-suites. They're going to answer all the questions. You know, a lot of questions needs to be answered more in the mentorship or coaching point of view. And some of them, that's something that works for me particularly well, is that you can reach out to your network and browse who has faced a similar challenge. But I think what is very important in what you said is that you cannot fly solo on that journey. There is too much ambiguity and too much dynamics. And I guess the risk of making mistakes if you don't build that advisory platform is very high.
It used to be said, this is many years ago, but there was an axiom that said no one ever got fired for hiring IBM. And then I think it shifted over the years where companies, when they got to a certain point, would look to hire those traditional management consulting firms, think Bain, McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, and they would bring in these incredibly gifted and smart MBAs and very expensive teams to come in and provide that advisory service. And articles that I've been reading recently have been saying that entire ecosystem is pretty much being cannibalized or being severely disrupted as clients don't want to pay for 20 junior people at very high rates to come in and basically learn on the job, when AI, if trained and if built correctly, could provide you maybe 80% of the answer you need in a fraction of the time. Where do you see those traditional advisory organizations that could come alongside as that co-pilot, or to bring in industry expertise, or to provide an objective point of view? Do you think that industry is going to exist going forward? Do you think it's going to be shifted to something else? What are your thoughts?
Well, let me say, Mike, that I couldn't agree more with that statement. I think that sense of advisory service where a company would come into your organization delivering a certain best practice on something, right? Whether it's optimizing your supply chain or people management or development process, or you name it, they had basically a menu of all those processes that are in one way or another a universally best practice. And then you would be tasked with implementing it and mastering with minimum adjustment. I think that is gone. I couldn't agree more. I don't think that service is going to disappear, but it is definitely need to redefine itself. And there are two caveats that I would see for the organizations. The first of all is that it is no longer the mastering of the universal process when you actually have an option effectively implementing a process that is perfectly tailored to your needs. So which one you're going to go for? Of course, this inevitably pivots back to what we talked about before. You have to have a very strong-minded leadership who knows exactly what to do when they're taking the calculated risk to go for the customized process. And then there is a new process emerging, which is defining processes like this. So if you think about it, like this is no longer the winning factor that you are going to implement your S&OP process according to the best standards and you master it, rather instead you're going to develop the way you do demand and supply planning in a unique way specific to your organization. Now, what are the tools that are going to build that process? And let's say that there are 6 agents along the way who are going to do that, right? So now that advisory process or the competence that you need to develop inside the organization is how good am I going to become in training those agents? If not, it doesn't matter how well you fight, it matters how well you trained your drone in a sequence of moves, right? And this is basically how I see the processes of the future are going to look like. And if those organizations want to continue provide the service, I think that's how their service is going to emerge, right? They're no longer going to do your process. They're gonna optimize the way you train your tools to create customized process that exactly meets your business objective.
So for the executive suite that is going through and having these questions of things are shifting, they don't know necessarily what next looks like. Where are executives, from your point of view, where are they going to source that information, to reach out to peers, to gain that level of understanding that there's options available, there's a new world that's available? Where are they going for that level of counsel? What's your experience?
That's a tough one, to be honest. Where do you go for guidance on the uncharted territory? I must say, I see surprisingly the end of this year with my contacts with the peers and networks, I, for the first time, see the number of solutions that are AI-centric, there are algorithmic, that have been implemented and tested and have been proven successful, and not just with one organization, but they're more like a pattern. One example that I can bring up is SDRs, the sales development reps in Salesforce or similar softwares. If the one thing I can take from the executive summit of Salesforce this year that I heard the most is that of many things that, for better or worse, have functioned or got out of the proof of concept stage, that is the one that is a clear moneymaker. You had a pool of leads that you were not able to approach purely because you didn't have the way to individually talk to those people, and suddenly you can. And if I see anything as a consistent feedback from the network, is that this is what universally works. Right? So this is the example of the fact where you can reach out to the network, survey certain business areas and processes that have been especially productive if empowered with the AI-centric solutions, and you start building a little bit of a pattern. And now you say, yeah, okay, let me start with SDR. This is something I can do in 3 months. I can do it in 6 months. Lots of people won with that. So as long as I do it well, I'm probably going to win with that too. The whole unknown, right? That is the whole thing. Okay, I would like to optimize my margins or cash flow is probably a bad example. There is something where you're not getting that answer. I mean, your advisors are giving you the old ways and your network is telling you, I tried that and it didn't work, right? And what do you do? And I think that in this element, it is important to also build your own AI copilots that will give you the perspective of your own internal data that you wouldn't otherwise come up with yourself. So now you add this additional factor, and coming back to your question is who you go to knowledge for when you've exhausted your network, your coaches, your mentors, your advisors. It is actually your advisory AI that you need to go to, and sometimes you need to create it. And I don't think it is as difficult as it may seem, because in the end of the day, all you're asking for is look at my data and give me the perspective I haven't been thinking about.
Oh, that's very helpful. Thank you. A term that's been widely thrown around and a lot of companies are jumping on this is the Palantir model of the forward deployed engineer. Palantir is a company where they are deploying incredibly gifted and experienced individuals out into the field to sit alongside the problem. And for that rapid feedback where those engineers are being able to create that solution almost at the endpoint with a very quick turnaround cycle because they hear the problem, fix the problem. It's very much an engineering approach. And Salesforce and a number of other companies are trying to take the same approach of creating a world where they have these forward deployed engineers. And I think it's a great solution, but I think we need to be mindful of the fact that engineers think like engineers. And there's a very trained way of approaching a problem and solutioning. And I'm wondering, do you think there's an opportunity for a different model? And I'm going to call this the forward deployed entrepreneur, the forward deployed doctor, meaning someone who can come in and who has enough battle scars, enough a deep enough experience to be able to be in that situation and to be aware objectively to look at where the issues are that people that are really deep into that challenged experience may not see. Is that something where you believe there's an opportunity? Do you think the engineering model is a right approach? Who is that group that can come in and provide that level of aha moment, that level of tip of the spear, so to speak, to help provide the experience and the solutioning to those challenges that AI could be the solution to?
I think this is a very important question. When I think about the four engineer model and what you said, the engineers think like engineers. And if you think about the biggest risk of that exercise is that who defined the task for them and how did they do that, right? Like, is there any glitch there? And not even in the sense of how the task has been defined, but for example, how well it aligns with the strategic objectives of the organization or how well it aligns with other processes and other platforms, right? You may be very successful in solving that particular problem, but it can actually become a distortion in the bigger picture of how you run the organizations or where you're trying to drive the bigger picture. So I think that the two things I always think about is that you should never be afraid to experiment with different approaches and not land on only one that you think is going to be universal. And the second thing is really unlearning, right? Is the assumption that a lot of thought patterns and the engineering pathways, development models, the ideas of how you would address and solve your problem a few years back will inevitably no longer be the ones to use. And then, of course, you have much more pawns on your chessboard to play with, including the various ways of either ready products or homegrown developed agentic solutions. So I think that experimentation and unlearning is the key. And the models we described will be good for a lot of things, but we cannot just consider the one size fits all.
I think this is also speaking to where I see one of the biggest problems are in this ecosystem, which is a lack of understanding, a lack of clarity, and everyone's trying to optimize, everyone's trying to apply AI, but almost universally, I feel that there's very little understanding on what truth is, meaning not what you believe it to be, but what your reality actually is. And I'm going to use this analogy of a doctor. And so I feel that companies that try solutioning are almost jumping ahead to the surgery side of things versus someone saying, there's something wrong. I don't know what it is. And I need someone to come in and provide me a third party opinion and just to show me what is happening. I don't need them to solution it. I just need them to provide me a level of understanding. And, I see that really being done in three ways. Someone coming in saying, okay, in a company, what's working? Because there's things that will be working well. There's things that are going to be broken, and there's things that are going to be at risk. And I think this needs to be done through few different perspectives. I think one, there's an understanding of how the technology set up in the company that needs to be, looked at from those three perspectives. I think there has to be discussions that are done within the company of the people and ask them what's working, what's not working, and where do you see there being risk before applying AI, before shifting the business, before making these significant adjustments to the organization. Someone has to talk to the people that are doing the work. And then thirdly, I think they need to have a perspective on how things are being looked at from a financial point of view. If something's broken, but it doesn't have a large financial impact on the business, you don't put effort into it. But if something is having a significant impact, then that should be really prioritized differently. Who do you believe can provide that level of understanding, that objective way of looking at things in a world where if you get it wrong, it could be a very detrimental step by not basing those decisions as a leadership team on what your reality is? Who do you feel is able in a position to really provide that? And do you think it's needed?
Well, I see that less as the obligation of people, particular leaders or groups, or something that can be explained through the organizational design. I see that more as the leadership philosophy and again, the culture of the organization that supports intelligent failure for that matter. That was the thing I was thinking about when I listened to your question. Is that this is something that needs to be built into the culture, right? Your ability to challenge the thesis. So you said what's wrong, but in current world, how tough it is to really define what is really wrong, right? The financial criteria may not be the good criteria. Personally, I think that there is one thing that will work 100% of the time is the solidity of the vision that you have for the organization. So if you say that in your organization, I want to sell through Salesforce, I want to be the the top regarded company in my industry or in the market in terms of what the customers say are being serviced, right? You anchor that on that beacon of something that you decide for your organization. And then everything else now suddenly what lies beneath is not that important. All you do is the assessing whether each and individual action, the error you fixed, the error you failed to fix, the error you failed to observe, whether all of this drives you towards that target, right? And now that always believe that the processes you build, you have the people around the process, you have your enablers within the process, and then you have another layer which is only dedicated to control the efficiency of that process. So I believe that if you have all those layers in place, you should have a relative clarity of whether your company is progressing in terms of delivering that phenomenal level of service that leverages customers' loyalty and brings more customers into your portfolio, right? That gives you this light conscious, right? That out of multiple initiatives you undertook to go towards that goal, you comfortably kill 10. Just fail fast, fail cheap, right? And inevitably, if you don't cling to those legacy processes or even, let's say, that fixation that it has to be a significant dollar value for us to even look into something, right? Is that you will inevitably create your own know-how about how to optimize your processes toward that high-level visionary goal, right? And if there is a determination and your faith that this is the right thing that is really going to make a change for your company, I think you're ultimately going to be successful.
Thank you for that. I want to shift here a little bit because the market's shifting significantly where individuals who have been in industry for 10, 20 years are now finding themselves without roles and opportunities as companies are downsizing. Large organizations have been, whether you want to call it silent hiring, of not filling roles that have been let go. Students who are coming out of school who traditionally would have had an easy time finding jobs are now having a very difficult time, especially in computer science. They're running into an environment where they almost feel a bit of helplessness because the vision that they've been given of finish school, get a degree in this environment is not being hired for anymore. Do you think hiring, from your point of view, is going through a significant shift where we need to rethink what value we're providing in applying or having conversations with companies?
I think this is going to be a major and revolutionary shift. And there is a lot of discussion about not only how the particular jobs are going to change in the face of AI and algorithmic processes, but how the entire philosophy of organizational design is going to shift. So I'm confident that the organizations we are going to be seeing from big to small in the coming years are going to be organized in a completely different fashion than they are organized today. Now, the light at the end of the tunnel that I see for that is that technological progress is ultimately going to create a massive jump in the value added. And with that, everyone profits. It's a little bit like the spinning machines 100 years ago, right? I mean, once they were invented, people thought that this is the end to the craftsmanship of fabric making. Within 25 years, there were 4 times the number of jobs in the industry that there were before the Industrial Revolution. But of course, there were different jobs. And of course, a lot of people suffered along that process. And I think we need to be mindful of that, especially for people who are entering the job market or are in those positions that are already targeted with the AI revolutions. I mean, with basic positions, we don't like doctors, right? They are very much affected with how AI diagnostic progresses. Certain legal jobs, right? So we're talking about sophisticated type of work that is getting significantly affected. And a lot of people will find themselves need to either completely requalify to drop off of the current job market. I think this is a significant problem that will affect less so the organization themselves as it will affect the people and the communities.
I couldn't agree more. And I would even take it further and say, I think there's coming an end to the per hour engagement model. No one wants to pay a lawyer X amount of dollars for 15 minutes or, X amount of dollars per hour when they know that lawyer just simply grabbed a template or put it into, their tool and grabbed, whether it's through LexisNexis or these other tools and just simply put out a draft. If I know it takes you 5 minutes and you're billing me for an hour, I'm going to have a problem because I have now seen behind the curtain. There was a belief of things needing a lot of customization, and now the cat's out of the bag, so to speak. Do you think that the outcomes-based model, meaning I will deliver this outcome for this price within this time frame and don't worry about how many hours, is the right model? Or do you think there's a better model that companies are going to be looking for both internally and also when bringing on partners?
Well, for one thing, I can say if the legal work gets disenchanted, then I definitely going to be cheering for that. Things. It makes me think of one seminar I was in that was particularly focused on the IT services and development work. And the topic for discussion was the AI enablers in the software development process, with a lot of very tangible data of successful deployment on QC and basic coding. The interesting outcome was that it brought about 30% increase, right? And this comes, so it's not black or white. It's not that a certain type of service or work existed and occupied a certain portion of the pie in the value creation. Now it doesn't exist. It may shrink or expand slightly, and it will definitely shift in quality, right? So that 30% that development company no longer spends on basic coding or QA works can actually be shifted towards more creative or more adaptive or even faster deployment of the software, which in itself should produce more savings, should produce more outcomes, should produce ROI. Right? So I don't see that, with a few exceptions. I don't see this as wiping out the entire industries, but definitely a lot of things will change. And that type of activity that you described, I absolutely believe has the target on it back.
And I think this is an opportunity as well for those that are going through a career change or needing to look at things from a different perspective, is find a problem, become the solutionist to that problem, and repeat. Because the more you do it, not only will you become more effective and efficient, but you'll also be able to layer on the learnings from others. And so, when the Salesforce world, I think the biggest challenge is the lack of clarity and the lack of context that most companies have when making decisions as to how they're going to run their business. And this can be applied to ERPs. This can be applied to pretty much any major enterprise grade technology that is being run like a tool. And what I mean by that is it doesn't have the funding, it doesn't have the structure, the governance, the people around to run it correctly. And so they need some ways of looking at things to have a true picture of that reality. And I think that's how companies are going to truly get the step change in growth and in truly enabling their company to operate at the highest levels, is to have all the lights turned on, so to speak, and to look at what reality is. And I think it's scary for a lot of companies to do that because you don't know what you don't know. But I think for those companies that lead the way and take that opportunity to get coaching and mentorship and to surround themselves and build the culture for transparency, and for them to not fear what they don't know, but to work together to move on that level of truth, that truth layer, I think it's going to enable a new layer of confidence in business that we haven't seen before. Do you think that's an approach that is likely to catch on, or do you think we're going to want to operate in the dark?
That is something very important you said, and I wanted to zero in on that. Is what you mentioned, that culture of doing something right and repetition and doing something right and repetition, right? Because actually both worlds of not seeing enough and seeing too much coexist almost on top of each other, right? And the question is, how do you comb through it, right? How do you uncover what you do not see? And how do you select of what you see too much and put this together into the desirable outcome? I thought that what you mentioned in the sense of repetition, that is very important. I remember someone saying that, and it's a end of the year, so a lot of people going to have year-end resolutions, right? I'm going to drop 20 pounds by March. You hear a lot of that. There's going to be a lot of motivation. But especially in this perspective, if you actually want to reach a certain, let's say, athletic goal, you do not reach it through motivation. Motivation is not natural to last. It's just how our brains are built, how our bodies are built. What lasts is a routine. So if you actually want to achieve that goal and any other goal in terms of how you get better, right? How do you get better as a leader in efficient selecting of abundant information or are covering the hidden information to the right result is not going to be to your motivation or through your excitement of a new tool or agentic AI that has been given to you. It comes through the integrity and tenacity, almost, I would say, of your leadership and business pursuit that you turn into routine. You're just going to be doing it a little differently. Yeah. You would say, okay, now suddenly I have the entire my organization, the few dozen of the different agentic solutions, and my focus needs to be in constantly optimizing those that are worth doing so, rejecting those that don't work, bringing in the new ones. And that is my modus operandi on a daily basis that is turning into that repetition and improvement that you talked about.
Well, this has been incredibly insightful. And so, just one last question. If every CIO that was listening to this could take one step when they come into work on that Monday back after holidays, what do you feel like that first step should be for them to truly get the best impact and outcome for next year?
I would say imagine how your work is going to look in 12 months. Like envision, close your eyes and envision the structure of your time, your calendar, your effort dedicated towards perfecting the solutions that are a market standard or even ahead of what you want to be for your organization in 12 months. And as a beacon. And if you feel that all it's going to be is a slight improvement of my current routine, then you may not be on the right path.
Well, Peter, I want to say thank you for bringing your perspective and insight. And I love all the analogies that we covered. I feel like we got into some areas that really brought light to concerns and how to approach things for next year. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining the podcast. And I really appreciate your insight.
Mike, thank you so much for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, well, look, I mean, that was same to you. I mean, like I've seen that there has been a lot of wisdom through what you do, and I think you had a number of spot-on observations. Thank you for making it easy.
Absolutely. I feel like there's a lot of frustration and there's a lot of companies that are trying to pitch or trying to solve problems without understanding. And, having been in the Salesforce ecosystem for so long, there's just so much. Everyone has a motivation for trying to tell you they can either fix something, they can do something. It's now becoming a technology platform that companies really can't turn off. I would say it's a very sticky environment where Salesforce has done a great job, but there's no competition, meaning you can't just simply turn off Salesforce and go turn on something else. I mean, maybe Microsoft's tool or maybe another platform, but they've almost embedded themselves. And every time a client needs help, the Salesforce team is trying to sell you more licenses. The traditional software integration partners are trying to sell you more solutions or telling you need to start again and you need to, hire our 15 people to come in and rebuild something. Do you think there's a place for someone to come in and provide that objective? Let's just look at what your reality is. And from there, you can make the right decisions objectively. Do you think there's a place for that in the mid-market?
I think absolutely, because I'm worried about mid-market because I feel that the mid-market leaders should worry. Thinking about my organization as well, mid-market companies are trying to comfort themselves. Oh, we have all the time in the world because those giants are like going to take forever. No, they're not going to take forever. And Salesforce, they go, look, one of my biggest competitors is Becton Dickinson. I don't know if you look. So it's one of the largest medical devices manufacturer in the world, US based, right? And one thing these guys have is they have a very well-established sales processes and they have Salesforce data that reaches back 14 years. So what effort is that for them to start implementing Agentforce? It's almost flips off a switch, right? So for the small organization that now are in this kind of disbelief, denial, oh, I'm going to be all right, but I don't really know what I want to do. I don't really know what my process looks like. I lack documentation. I think that they are in danger. And I would see, let's say, the successful consultancy and the successful services that come approach from the definition of the business objective point of view. And it's almost like this analogy of a beacon, right? I mean, the risk you have to take is really what you want your company to be and be really committed to that. And then you can bring consultants who align on that vision with you, right? And then again, become agnostic in terms of what solution is going to be provided to achieve that. Is the one thing what I really like about how Salesforce approaches things, at least in the way they see their vision, is that they give you a layer to train your agents, to work your data through data cloud, to use this natural language programming for semantic layers for Tableau. I mean, time will tell how successful it is going to be on the execution, but I think that the philosophical framework about this is very correct. But now you have that platform, and if the leadership vision is lacking, or if they lack to create that network of advisors, consultants, mentors, and their peers that can help them make the right choices with it, they basically just lost in the wood, right?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I just finished a project with a medical device company. They were purchased by Johnson and Johnson, so they're considered mid-market, but they're needing to step up in their level of maturity from a fast-growing startup, even though they're $1 billion business, to operating more like a traditional enterprise. And so they came in and said, "Oh, we want some help to implement Agentforce." And so, in having some conversations, it became very clear that they were not really aware of what their world looked like. I proposed something to them. I said, "Okay, before we do anything, let's look at this like a doctor. And before suggesting surgery and all this really expensive stuff, let's just get a baseline." So I ran this thing called Vitals for them, which is a 6 week come in. I looked at technology, talked to the people, looked at the metadata, and did a full analysis. If things were a stoplight of red, yellow, and green, they were all in yellow and red when it came to the tech debt, to the compliance, to the complications, and just the way the business was set up. It was so complicated. It had so many issues that if they were to apply Agentforce or AI, it would almost create a state of chaos for them. And the thing is, no one came in to tell them the truth. Salesforce came in telling them you just need to buy more licenses. SIs came in saying you just need to hire our team to come in. And then when coming in and providing this objective, like a doctor going, we're going to do blood work, we're going to check your weight, we're going to run all these tests, and giving it to them that level of truth and understanding, they came back saying, wow, we actually could have really hurt ourselves and invested a lot of money and actually put ourselves through a situation where it could have actually created a significant amount of business pain. Do you think there's an opportunity for being that position of that objective layer that can come in and provide that truth layer, that confidence layer for organizations? Do you think that's a spot?
I do very much. And I think you described the two approaches, right? So you have a problem. I know you have a problem. So let me sell you something. So maybe you can solve the problem, right? But this is too complex, right? Or even you have the old EY approach. I know I have a problem. You know you have a problem. So let me pick something off the shelf. And let's say it's supply chain. So let me pick my supply chain team, which are junior people. They're going to bill you a lot and I'm going to sign off. And then for better or worse, I can certify that now you have a very good old fashioned supply chain process. And I think the gap there, it's a time, there's actually an English book that writes about it. It's called Algorithmic Leader. It talks a lot about the way how leadership needs to evolve in terms of being technology savvy on one end. So you can see a certain first-hand understanding of what technology be doing. It's not the magical beings for you. But at the same time, you are really solid of what do we actually want to achieve, right? So now as you have all these orange lights and the red lights with that customer that you described, I'm curious to hear what you did. So maybe let me pause. Let's hear what's the first step that you told after you saw all of that? And then what was your first reaction?
Sure. So I'll send you kind of a one pager that describes this because I'm really looking for product market fit. I'm not pitching anything. I just would love your thoughts on this. So I'm approaching it with 3 points. And so I've been doing this for 20 years and I finally put it together as a model. So the first thing is what I call vitals. It's going in, it's looking at and truly understanding what's broken, what's working, what's at risk from those 3 perspectives. 6 weeks, it's coming in just saying, here's reality. And from there, the clients can make really 3 choices. 1, thank you, but I'm not going to do anything. You made me aware I'm not in good shape. I have a lot of problems, but I'm not with enough motivation to change. Or I don't want to spend the money, or I just don't want to do it. Option 2 is let's just monitor. And so, I can keep some of these tools to provide that awareness to show the metadata, the changes, and just show that inflection by providing like a monthly or quarterly report saying, you've improved here, you've had some challenges here, but here's where you're at. And so when you're ready to make that decision, you have that historical understanding so that you can say to your executive team, we need to invest because we can see it's getting worse. And the third option is what I call the business MRI's entire point is to provide context. Once you have clarity that there's a problem, the second part is actually understanding your context. And that is mapping out those processes as they're actually designed and how they're actually built out in Salesforce, not what you think. And then by doing so, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4 processes, and then putting around the governance layer to enable and support it. And then the third part, once that's done, is what I call the treatment plan. The treatment plan is to walk alongside those clients to then show them how to operationalize Salesforce, how to make those improvements, and allow them to become self-sufficient so that they are able to run on their own. And so it's an advisory hybrid, meaning it's providing them the awareness and guidance on how to do it, but not designing it so that if I leave, they can't do it themselves, which is the traditional consulting model.
Right.
I build it so I never leave, but giving them that, I call it a system as a service. So it's providing to them that model where it's not done for you, it's not done, you do it yourself. It's a done with you model where they can apply, because the systems are changing so quickly. You need to have a live environment that's showing and reflecting that reality in real time. So that's kind of the 3-step, and I'm calling it the confidence layer or the confidence operating system that sits above Salesforce. And so
Yeah.
I'm just getting feedback on it right now and just, curious in your thoughts, and I can send you over some information, but I would just love your perspective because I'm feeling the pain and it's something that is deep within. I want to fix that problem. And I'm just wanting to make sure it is a problem that is worth fixing.
I think like the way you describe it definitely lands very well with me, right? I mean, like in the Kyra, I mean, you don't want to give them fish, you want to give them the fishing rod, right? Can I ask you a lot about technical layer? So when you do the vitals, right? Like how do you do this? You just go into the environment, maybe run like a Tableau analysis or stuff like that. How do you define them? Because you show up, you're now in an environment that you know little about, maybe the industry that you know little about, and you're about to tell them what's wrong, right? So how do you go over that first step?
Sure. So I need to have admin level access to their sandbox environment, either full or partial copy sandbox, and I actually do a metadata analysis on the environment itself.
Mhm.
And it gives me the full diagnostics of what's happening inside of their environment. I also, depending on the client wants it, doing like license audits to make sure that they're actually aligned correctly with the amount of licenses they have.
Mhm.
And the last client I did this with had $400,000 of worth of unused licenses they were not even aware of. They were just sitting idle, and I show them and they're like,
Oh my God.
you did what? So that's the second thing. And then there's also that metadata process configuration mining of actually going in and then mapping out those processes. And then through that mapping, identifying where there's Agentforce opportunities or where it makes sense to use things like flows and others, because it's now mapping it out and saying, hey, this here is a perfect opportunity for flows because you've got the data to back it up, or this is where you want to use Agentforce, and then being able to present that back to the business and have them come back to, we don't want to automate this. It's not enough of a business use case to put effort into it. Let's focus on this use case over here. And so I map it according to their industry and benchmark to see if they're above or below. And this is where I benchmark this, med tech company and
Understood.
showed that they were 3 times more complicated, 8 times more configuration, a huge amount of tech debt, and actually mapped out and then align it to those roles to say, these are the skill sets that you now need to fix this tech debt. And then providing that level of objectivity, it allowed them to go, you're sharing with us truth to give us the understanding to make that right decision. And so that's where I've always liked to be, because I'm not trying to convince someone to do something they don't want to. I'm providing them facts. And that's why, working with IBM, it was hard because they're like, don't tell them the facts, sell them the solution, like get them to convince and to commit, millions of dollars to fixing it, but don't tell them all the other parts. I'm like, well, that's not really being ethical.
Yeah, no,
So
look, I like that. I really like it. So look, I mean, if there is like a material to look at, I would love to look at that. And in fact, I would love to continue that conversation. It's an interesting moment because in fact, I've been running Agentforce more as a POC so far. And I've just decided to deploy it organizational wide. And I just made a couple of decisions like the SDR after consulting with another bunch of people. But after that, there is a lot of things that speaks more to this kind of experience that you described, is to really look at a different perspective of what is wrong. And then you said about this, let's say the different reactions to that, right? Do we do nothing or we monitor or we go and start fixing it? I would put one more layer on that. I mean, it's always a Pareto rule, right? So the point is, let's identify the number one process that I think is really worth investing in, or 3, right? It's almost like what is Steve Jobs' empty table thing, right? Like when he came to Apple being the bankrupt and saw all the patents and said like, "All I want you to leave 4 things, right? Get everything out." And they ended up getting everything else out, and they ended up getting everything out, not even the 4 things. But now they developed the space to create, the MacBook and the iPod and the iPhone, and you name it. This is kind of something that how I would look at that, right? Of all the vitals that you have there, now, what is the number one thing or maximum top 3 things that have a chance to bring in the biggest impact? And this is where I think this is the pivotal moment, because if you get this right, they're going to get ROI. And now you have a completely different engagement. You have a completely different perspective, right? And not just from the senior team who's going to write the check, but really for people who are going to be engaged, will are ultimately critical to making that initiative successful. But I like the way you're looking at this, right? So this is joining the customer on the journey to change their perspective, right? To provide them the data that will ultimately alter the way they operate. They develop the skill. And guess what? Once they have the skill, their perspective is going to broaden up, and they're going to find another 10 things that they need to have improved.
Sometimes it's just needing to have someone who has your best interest at heart, who can listen and be aware and to see the things you can't see, to go, what about over here? And to identify that thing that has always been there, but it's going, wow, if we focused over here, then we could actually, triple or whatever the business impact is you're looking for. And I think that's where there's such an opportunity for the outside experience to come in and to provide that awareness for people that are shifting careers, or even people that are coming in as more junior employees, to have those eyes that have not been indoctrinated to a way of thinking, to be able to provide that understanding and awareness that is truly going to not enable those companies that are willing to bring that in as a new perspective to really have a blossoming next step in this new AI
Yeah.
journey. So I'll send it over to you, and would love to keep talking about it, because this is probably the thing that I'm most passionate about, is actually helping those companies bridge that gap of moving out from where they're stuck, which is the way they've always been operating, to this new world. But it's a chasm. It is a bridging need.
Yeah.
And a lot of companies don't yet know how to bridge it because they don't know what reality is.
Yeah, that's true. They don't know what reality is, and also they really need to rethink their leadership skills sometimes in operating in that environment. I was looking forward to that material, and look, I'll be happy to stay in touch. It's an interesting time for me, so I think that if we connect in 2-3 months, I would have a lot of experiences to share. And if you'd like to hop on a call for 30 minutes and exchange views on that, I'll be happy to do that.
Absolutely. So I'm going to have someone work on doing the editing. I'll get this over to you by hopefully end of day. Just share your thoughts if you see some gaps or areas to tweak, because this is really what I want to lean in with next year. I want to make sure I'm asking those people that I trust who are in it to go, yeah, that's a problem. Yes, it's worth going after, versus me having an idea and never asking anyone. And in 6 months' time going, I probably should have validated this with someone before.
Well, you've done a lot of validating, let me tell you that. I mean, like, I was really impressed how you structured that good conversation. So it's very clear what layer of, let's say, thinking and logic sits behind it. So I enjoyed it a lot, Mike. And so thank you for that.
Fantastic. Well, Peter, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'll be in touch with you soon.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Mike.
Bye.
Enjoyed this deep dive? Hit like or drop a comment with your biggest Salesforce challenge, and subscribe for more tactical insights. Know a CIO who has a story worth sharing? Tag them below or send us a message. We'd love to feature them next.